The sixth door closed on Nora Bell just as the freight platform began to split beneath 12 tons of bridge timber. She heard the sharp inner crack, saw 3 laborers standing below the sagging boards, and shouted before the yard owner finished telling her no. Clear the platform. The men stared at her. One still had his shoulder against a beam, while another reached for the next binding rope. Nora dropped her satchel and ran toward them. Leave the rope. Move north. The platform dipped. Iron wagon wheels shifted against the outer rail, and a stack of pine timbers rolled hard enough to bend their restraints. A tall cowboy near the loading ramp seized the nearest worker by his coat and pulled him clear. Nora snatched a loose support post from the ground and drove its upper end beneath the failing crossbeam. Push the wagon forward, she called. Take the weight off this corner. The yard owner finally moved. He waved the driver ahead, while Nora directed 2 workers to hold the support steady. The mules strained, the wagon rolled, and the groaning beneath the platform eased. For several seconds, only cedar dust moved. Nora crouched and ran her fingers along the broken beam. The outer wood looked sound. The split ran through its center, following a dark line where moisture had entered years earlier. She stood and brushed her palms against her skirt. That beam should have been replaced last winter. Asa Voss stepped from beside the lumber office. His gray coat remained buttoned neatly despite the sawdust hanging in the air. 5 minutes earlier, the county road foreman had examined Nora's employment request, asked where she had served her apprenticeship, and placed the paper back in her hands. She had given him the names of 3 contractors and 7 bridges. He had found her name on none of them. You heard a board crack, Asa said. That doesn't make you a bridgewright. No. Knowing which board cracked before 12 tons came through it does. His brass-tipped walking stick touched the repaired support. Once, twice, you kept men from being hurt, he said. I'll grant you that. Then reconsider my application. His gaze moved from her work dress to the scarred folding rule hanging from her belt. I answer for county bridges. I cannot place a road crew under someone whose work carries no recognized builder's mark. Those contractors used my measurements. That may be true. It is true. Asa returned to the office without taking her paper. Nora looked toward Copperbend's main street. 6 businesses had refused her since sunrise. The wagon shop needed a wheelwright, but would not hire a woman. The mill wanted references signed by men who had taken credit for her work. 2 carpenters had laughed before she finished speaking. At 35, she possessed $19, a complete set of hand tools, and enough experience to recognize a bad beam by sound. Copperbend had decided only the $19 could be proven. You missed one. The tall cowboy stood beside the platform. He had removed his hat, revealing dark hair marked with early gray near his temples. His face carried the hard color of winter wind, but his voice held no amusement. One what? Nora asked. 1 door. I counted correctly. You haven't tried mine. She picked up her satchel. Are you offering carpentry or a kitchen? The corner of his mouth moved, then settled. A bridge. That stopped her. He introduced himself as Caleb Rourke and told her the winter ice had destroyed the crossing on his northern property. 7 ranches south of the river depended on it. Without a replacement, their spring wagons faced a 40-mile detour. You watched me brace a platform, Nora said. You haven't seen me build anything. I watched Voss ask where your name was written. You answered with the names of bridges. Men can lie. So can marks burned into timber. His answer came without hesitation. Nora studied him more closely. What happened to your builder? He quit after seeing the river. That may have been his first sensible decision. Will you inspect it? For wages. Yes, and if I find it cannot be finished safely before the thaw. You pay for the inspection and hear the answer. Yes, no bargaining, no careful attempt to reduce her price before she named it. Nora unfolded her wooden rule and held it between them. If I accept the work, I control the design. I choose the timber. I can stop construction whenever I find something unsafe. Caleb looked at the chipped rule, and the initials cut along its edge. None belonged to Nora. "You'll put that in writing?" he asked. "I was about to ask you the same." They wrote the terms on the clean back of a lumber invoice. Caleb signed first and handed her the pencil. He did not watch her as if expecting the name to be crooked. By noon, Nora stood beside the ruined Rourke crossing 4 miles outside Copperbend. The river remained trapped beneath blue-white ice, but its movement could be heard through the broken pilings. Water struck wood somewhere below with a slow, hollow knock. 3 workers waited near a pile of salvaged boards. Each looked toward Caleb when Nora approached the bank. She ignored them and studied the high-water scars on the cottonwoods. Snow still covered the distant ridge, but dark strips of exposed earth had begun appearing beneath the southern rocks. Nora pressed one boot against the frozen ground and listened. When did the ice begin talking like this? Caleb came beside her, leaving enough distance for her to move freely. "Yesterday morning." "And the south wind?" "3 days ago." She walked the remains of the western approach, measuring each surviving timber. The stone footings appeared solid from above. A dark seam beneath the central one told her appearances would not be enough. One worker pointed toward the stones. "We planned to build from those. No one builds from anything today," Nora said. The man looked at Caleb. Caleb's eyes stayed on Nora. "You heard the foreman." It was the first time anyone had given her that title without using it as a joke. She climbed onto the broken approach and studied the mountains again. The sun had reached the lower snowfields. Meltwater was already traveling beneath the ice, gathering strength where no one could see it. "How long?" Caleb asked. 18 days if the cold nights hold. And if they don't? Nora folded her rule. "Then, this river takes the choice away from us." One of the workers muttered that no woman could raise a wagon bridge in 18 days. Caleb reached into the tool wagon, removed an iron foreman square, and held it out to her. Nora looked at the square, the waiting crew, and the river moving beneath its frozen skin. Then she took it. "Survey begins at first light," she said. "Until I finish it, nobody touches those old foundations." At first light, Nora found the 3 workers standing beside the tool wagon with their coats buttoned high and their attention fixed on Caleb. She set the iron square on a barrel. "I need names before I give orders." The oldest man introduced himself as Levi Shaw. The broad one beside him was Sam Dugan. The youngest, whose eyes kept moving between Nora and Caleb, was Owen Price. Nora handed Levi a coil of measuring line. "You're with me on the western bank. Sam, uncover the ends of the surviving approach beams. Owen, cut 12 willow stakes and paint the tops red." Owen looked at Caleb. Caleb tightened a strap on the tool wagon without lifting his head. "The foreman spoke to you," he said. That ended the question. Nora walked the western approach with Levi. Frost covered the planks, hiding shallow splits until her scraper exposed them. 2 boards were sound. 3 had begun rotting where winter water had collected beneath them. She marked each one with chalk. Levi watched her work. "You planning to save any of this bridge?" "I'm planning to save whatever deserves saving." He nodded toward the stone foundations. "Those have held 12 years. Then, one more morning of inspection won't offend them." By mid-morning, Owen returned carrying willow lengths with bright red tips. Nora drove the first into the mud above the ice line and marked the water level against it. Owen studied the row as she continued downstream. "What are those supposed to tell you?" "How fast the thaw is moving. The river's frozen. The top is." She struck another stake into place. Check them at sunrise and sunset. Write down where the water reaches. If one moves, don't straighten it before I see it. Owen glanced at Caleb again, though less openly this time. Caleb was carrying damaged boards away from the approach with Sam. Nora stepped onto the ice near the western footing. A dark thread of water moved beneath its edge. She crouched and placed one palm against the stone. A faint vibration traveled through it. Levi shifted behind her. That safe? Standing here? For now. I meant the footing. Nora rose. I don't know yet. The honest answer unsettled him more than false confidence would have. She measured the exposed section, then walked upstream. The river narrowed near a wall of granite before widening around a bend. Above the narrow ground stood a small pine cabin with shuttered windows and a roof that had not lost a board all winter. Its wall beams were straight, dry, and long. Who owns that cabin? Nora asked. Levi's eyes went toward Caleb. Boss does. It's better timber than half of what's stacked beside the tool wagon. Levi lowered his voice. I wouldn't mention that to him. Why? The older man rubbed mud from his glove. Belonged to his brother. Nora waited, but Levi offered nothing more. She returned to the main worksite and found Caleb checking the stack left by the previous builder. Nora stretched her measuring line along the first beam. Light showed beneath it near the center. She checked the next one and found a twist running through the grain. How much did you pay for these? More than I wanted. 9 cannot go into the main span. Caleb looked at the pile. They were sold as bridge timber. They were sold as timber someone wanted gone. He lifted one end of the twisted beam. Nora held the line again, giving him the full length of the defect. We can use 3 for temporary work, she said. 2 can be cut for the approaches. The others leave this site. That costs us a day. It costs you a day now, or a bridge later. Sam and Owen had stopped working. Caleb lowered the beam. Its end struck the ground with a dull knock. Load the rejected pieces, he told them. Take them back to Copperbend. Owen blinked. All of them? Did she leave room in the answer? No, sir. Then move. Nora wound her line slowly. Caleb had lost money in front of his men without attempting to make her share the blame. When the wagon departed, he came toward her. What do we still have? Enough to begin the approaches after the survey. Not enough for the span. I ordered additional timber through the county yard. That explains why Asa Voss is riding toward us. Asa arrived with 2 county workers and a leather document case tied behind his saddle. He dismounted near the first red stake and tapped it with the brass head of his walking stick. What is this? A warning that can count, Nora said. He examined the remaining stakes before approaching the broken bridge. I heard Rourke placed you in charge. He read the contract before signing it. Ace's attention moved to the empty space where the rejected timber had been. You sent back 9 beams. They weren't fit for a main span. I approved that shipment. Then you inspected the outside and trusted the invoice. One county worker looked down to hide a reaction. Ace's stick struck the nearest foundation stone. The county can release 16 lengths of pine and 6 men for 4 days. That offer depends on your using these existing footings. I haven't approved them. They have survived 12 winters. So had the platform beam in Copperbend. Asa's mouth tightened. I cannot give county resources to an untested design built at an unapproved site. I haven't proposed another site. You spent an hour measuring the granite narrows. Nora looked upstream. Caleb stood near the tool wagon, listening without stepping into the exchange. I measured everything that might matter, she said. Asa opened his document case. Reuse the foundations, submit your design tomorrow, and pass my inspection on the 8th day. Meet those terms, and the county timber is yours. And if the foundations are unsafe, prove it. He mounted and rode away with his men. The workers returned from Copperbend near dusk. Nora spent the remaining light measuring the eastern bank, while Caleb recorded the figures she called out. His handwriting was compact and plain. When they finished, she nodded toward the cabin above the granite narrows. "Your brother built it?" Caleb's pencil stopped. "We built it together." He closed the notebook and handed it back. "The crew needs supper." He walked toward the ranch without looking at the cabin. Nora did not follow the question he had refused to answer. She returned to the willow stakes and recorded the sunset marks herself. Before sunrise the next morning, she reached the river with a lantern. The first stake stood where she had placed it. The second leaned slightly downstream. On the third, black water covered the lower red mark by 3 inches. Nora checked every stake twice. When Caleb approached, she was already folding her rule. "We don't have 18 days, she said. He looked at the water moving beneath the ice. "How many?" 14 by breakfast. Nora had cut 4 days from a schedule that already allowed no waste. She divided the work into 2 shifts. Levi and Sam would prepare the western approach while Owen and Caleb opened the eastern bank. Nora would move between them, checking every measurement before permanent timber was placed. "You intend to work after dark?" Sam asked. "I intend to stop when darkness makes the work unsafe." "That isn't an answer. It is the only one you need." Caleb lowered his coffee cup. "You heard her." The men carried their plates away. Nora remained at the table, redrawing the schedule, while Caleb studied the figures over her shoulder. "You put yourself on both shifts," he said. "I'm the only person Asa expects to answer for both. You still require sleep. I placed it between midnight and 4. That isn't enough. It is what the river allowed." Hooves entered the yard before he could answer. 3 ranchers had ridden from the southern side of the crossing. One was Margaret Hale, a silver-haired woman who managed 200 acres with her grown sons. The others introduced themselves as Frank Cole and Walter Briggs. Margaret placed both hands on the kitchen table. "I have seed and fencing wire waiting in Copperbend. Briggs has a wagon axle at the smithy. Cole needs salt before his stock moves north." "We were told 18 days, Walter said. Now, one of Rourke's men says 14. Nora folded the schedule. 14 is the present estimate. Can you promise it?" "No." Walter looked toward Caleb. Caleb remained beside the stove. "She gave you her answer." Walter's chair scraped the floor. "We have all crossed that river longer than she has been in Montana." "And yet, the bridge is gone," Nora said. Margaret's mouth pulled slightly at one corner. "What do you need?" she asked. 2 men tomorrow to move stone. 1 wagon for hauling. No one works beneath a suspended load, and no one changes my assignments because he has crossed the river longer than I have." Margaret stood. "You'll have the wagon." After they left, Caleb carried Nora's rolled drawings to the worksite without being asked. She noticed, but she did not thank him for handling something that needed carrying. The workers had constructed a shallow wooden trough beside the river. Nora filled one end with sand and stones taken from the old crossing. She placed 2 blocks where the existing foundations stood, then poured meltwater through the channel. The current divided around the first block. At the second, it cut into the sand and carried a thin brown stream toward the outer edge. Owen leaned closer. "That little box is supposed to tell us what the river will do?" "No, it shows what the river is already doing." She packed the sand again and changed the angle of the channel. The next pour struck the second block harder. "The current turned during the winter," she said. "Ice and flood debris may have pushed the main flow west. Until I can examine the central foundation below the ice, we treat it as unproven." Levi watched the sand disappear around the block, and Voss wants us building on it. Voss wants proof before he changes his judgment. Same thing, most days, not this one. Asa arrived near noon. He walked around the wooden channel once before lowering the brass tip of his stick into the wet sand. A child's river, he said. A river small enough for you to stand over without getting wet. He looked at the altered current line. You changed the angle. The real river changed it first. Nora showed him the morning measurements from the willow stakes. Asa read every figure, then returned the page without comment. I will release 8 lengths of county pine, he said. The remaining 8 come after inspection. 16 were offered. 16 were offered for a bridge using approved foundations. I need enough material to reach the inspection. Then give me something worth inspecting. He scheduled the examination for the 8th morning and left 2 county wagons carrying half the promised timber. It was less than Nora needed, but more than Asa had intended to release when he arrived. Work began on the western approach that afternoon. The old builder had left chalk marks, showing where the diagonal bracing should meet the upright posts. Sam and Owen followed those marks, fitting 3 braces before Nora returned from the eastern bank. She stopped beneath the first one and unfolded her rule. The measurements were correct. The timber was sound. The angle was wrong. Take them out. Sam stared at the completed work. We followed the marks. Those marks send the load against the grain. They were put there by a bridge builder. They were put there by a man who left. Sam looked toward Caleb. Caleb examined the brace, but did not touch it. How long to replace them? He asked Nora. Most of the night. He removed his coat and hung it on a fence post. Show me where to start. No argument followed. They worked after sunset beneath 2 shielded lamps. The temperature dropped until every metal tool stung bare skin. Nora reset each line while Caleb removed the first brace and Levi prepared its replacement. Sam and Owen stopped looking toward Caleb before making every move. By 10 o'clock, Margaret Hale's wagon arrived with 2 of her ranch hands and a covered basket of food. She did not stay for conversation. Nora ate half a biscuit while checking the 3rd brace. Caleb placed the other half on the drawing board when she tried to leave it behind. You cannot measure properly if your hands stop working, he said. They're working, they're slowing. She ate the rest. Near midnight, Nora carried a lamp onto the broken western approach to inspect their alignment from above. Caleb followed with the iron square. He stopped several feet from the final plank. The frozen river moved below them with the same hollow, knocking Nora had heard on her first day. You won't step past this point, she said. His eyes remained on the missing span. My brother's name was Owen. Nora glanced toward the youngest worker on the bank, then back at Caleb. He was named for him? Caleb nodded. My brother tried to cross during high water 6 years ago. I was standing on the northern bank telling him he still had time. His thumb rubbed a worn place on the square. I haven't crossed here since. Nora did not tell him the death was not his fault. She had not seen the river that day, and empty comfort would not strengthen anything between them. She held out her hand for the square. Then help me build one you can cross. Caleb placed it in her palm. They finished resetting the braces shortly before 2. Every joint sat cleanly against the posts. When Nora tested the line, no light showed beneath it. She returned to her room and slept without removing her work dress. A warm rush against the window woke her before dawn. Outside, snow slid from the bunkhouse roof in one heavy sheet. Water dripped from every eave. The wind coming over the ridge no longer carried the bite of winter. Nora stepped into the yard as Caleb emerged from the barn. Across the southern slope, long black strips of bare earth were opening between the snowfields. The Chinook had arrived. By sunrise on the 3rd morning of the Chinook, Nora's third red-tipped stake was gone. The remaining stakes leaned downstream. Water covered marks that had been dry the previous night, and the ice around the central foundation had turned gray. Behind her, hammers struck the western approach. 6 days of work had raised the frame high enough for its shadow to reach the river. Nora watched the central stone footing. It moved. The shift was small, no more than the width of a thumbnail, but a line of wet sand opened beside its base. Tools down. She called. The hammering stopped. Sam leaned over the approach. Asa comes tomorrow. Then he can inspect a stopped bridge. She ordered everyone off the structure and sent Owen to bring the long-handled river tools. Caleb came from the eastern bank, where he had been unloading the last of the county pine. "What did you see?" The footing shifted. He looked toward the central stones. "I didn't see it. I did." That was enough for him. Caleb ordered the men away from the approach, while Nora secured a line along the western bank. She and Levi opened a narrow channel through the weakened ice from solid ground. Dark water rose into the cut. Nora used a long iron rod to test the earth behind the footing. For the first 2 feet, she felt mud and stone. On the third push, the rod dropped without resistance. She withdrew it and tried farther downstream. The same empty space waited beneath the surface. Levi crouched beside her. "How much ground is gone?" "Enough. The outer stones had been laid over gravel rather than bedrock. Winter current had carved beneath them, while the ice concealed the damage. The visible footing remained upright because its own weight held it in place. Once the full spring current struck, that weight would carry it down." Nora stood and called Caleb over. "We cannot build here." His eyes moved to the completed approach. "How much can we save?" "The timber. Most of the hardware. And none of the time." Sam swore beneath his breath. Owen stared at the work they had completed during the last 6 days. "What happens to all that? We take it apart. We just put it up. And now we know what is beneath it." Nora climbed the bank and collected her drawings. She folded each sheet once. "Levi, mark every timber before it comes down. Sam, start with the outer braces. Owen, keep watching the stakes." No one moved. Caleb stepped onto the approach and pulled the first securing pin from the nearest brace. "You heard her," he said. The crew began dismantling the bridge. Nora walked upstream while they worked. She had measured the granite narrows twice, but until the footing failed, moving there had been only an alternative. Now, it was the only safe choice within miles. The river squeezed between 2 walls of stone before opening toward the old crossing. The narrower distance would reduce the main span, and the granite could hold the anchors the thawing bank could not. She unfolded her rule against the western rock face, then crossed the slope and measured the eastern rise. Caleb found her making notes near the line cabin. "You already chose the new site," he said. "The river chose it." "How long?" 12 days if we had all the material. We have 8. "I know." She pointed toward the granite. "The shorter span helps. The approaches will be steeper, but we can cut them into the slope. The problem is the main beams. The county pine? Too short for this design." He followed her gaze to the cabin. Its logs had cured beneath the Montana sun for years. The longest wall contained 4 straight beams with tight grain and no visible twisting. Caleb removed his hat. His fingers pressed a shallow bend into the brim. "No," he said. Nora folded her rule. "Then we closed the road until summer." His eyes left the cabin and returned to her. "You would walk away from the bridge? I would walk away from a design that cannot be made safe. 7 ranches need that crossing." "I know. My contract with you? Pays through today if you end it. I will write out what can be done when the water falls. The Chinook moved through the pines above them. Snow struck the cabin roof in wet pieces and slid over the eaves. Caleb looked toward the old crossing. The crew was taking apart the approach, one brace at a time. There must be other timber, not within 8 days. What about the mill? Their longest cured beams were sold to the railroad camp. Anything freshly cut will move as it dries. He walked to the cabin door but did not open it. Nora remained beside the granite wall. "I'm not asking you to dismantle it," she said. "You just told me it is the only way. I told you what the bridge requires. The cabin is yours. And if I say no, I respect the answer." His hand closed around the door latch. "You make that sound simple. It isn't my choice. That makes it clear, not simple." Hooves approached from downstream. Asa Voss rode into the construction camp with 4 county workers and an empty timber wagon. His coat hung open in the warm wind. He dismounted beside the dismantled approach. "What happened?" Nora showed him the exposed cavity beneath the footing and explained the movement. Asa tested the gap with his walking stick, then examined the marked timbers being removed. "You halted before the inspection. The foundation would not survive it. You cannot know that from one opening. I know the supporting earth is gone." Asa looked upstream toward the place she had measured. "You intend to move the crossing?" "Yes, that site has no county approval. It has granite. It has no surveyed approach, no completed design, and no established work estimate. I'll have those by morning." Asa closed his document case. "The remaining county timber is suspended. My men returned to Copperbend. You offered 4 days. For an approved crossing. You wanted proof the old footing was unsafe. There it is. And now you want me to approve another bridge before you have drawn it." His stick tapped the exposed stone. "I will inspect your new proposal when it exists. Until then, county property stays in the yard." The workers climbed back onto their wagon. Asa paused before mounting. "You were right to stop," he said. "That does not make the new site right." He rode away with the labor and timber Nora had expected to use. At the cabin, Caleb still held the latch. Nora returned to the crew and spent the next hour directing the removal of the western frame. When the final brace came free, a heavy wooden knock sounded upstream. Caleb had opened the cabin. He stood inside alone. Dust moved through the sunlight behind him. 2 narrow bunks remained against the wall, along with a cold iron stove and wooden pegs holding an old canvas coat. He touched nothing. When he came outside, he carried a crowbar. Nora met him beside the longest wall. Caleb removed his gloves, placed the iron beneath the first plank, and looked toward the granite narrows. "Move the bridge." The cabin came apart more slowly than the bridge. Nora marked every beam before the crew removed it. Caleb insisted that the walls be dismantled without splitting the wood. Though careful work consumed hours, the river was no longer willing to spare. The new bridge required 12 days. They had 8. Margaret Hale sent her wagon before sunrise. Levi and Sam lowered the longest beams onto it, while Owen wrapped the ends in old canvas to protect them from stone. Caleb worked inside the cabin, alone. Nora entered when she heard a nail pull through wood instead of coming free. Caleb had placed the crowbar against the wrong side of a roof brace. "Stop." He released the pressure. She moved the iron 2 inches and showed him where the grain had already opened. "This beam carries the center of the new span. We cannot tear it before it reaches the river." His hand remained on the crowbar. "Then tell me where to put it." She guided the tool into position. Caleb leaned his weight against it, and the nail lifted cleanly. "You don't need to do this yourself," Nora said. "I know. You could let the crew handle the rest." "I know that too." She studied the room. One bunk had already been taken apart. The other stood beneath the window, its blanket folded into a hard square. "Are you giving me these beams because you believe in the design?" "I'm giving them to the bridge." That wasn't the question. Caleb rested the crowbar against the wall. "My brother will not return because I keep this cabin standing." His eyes moved to the empty bed frame. "Other men need the crossing he never reached." That answer clear enough? Yes, Nora picked up the next roof brace. "Then I'll use them." By noon, the cabin had become a stack of numbered timber. Its outline remained on the ground, a pale rectangle where snow had not reached the earth for years. Caleb stood within it after the last wagon left. He put on his gloves and followed the timber downhill. At Shale Cut, Nora stretched lines between the granite walls and redrew the span around the cabin beams. The shorter distance helped, but the eastern approach required cutting into the slope. Every foot removed from the river had to be added in stone and labor. Walter Briggs arrived with 2 workers, saw the dismantled bridge downstream, and demanded his wagon back. "You told us 14 days, he said. "The old foundation failed. And now you are beginning again." "Yes," Walter looked toward the rising water. "I cannot lose 2 men for a bridge that may not open." "Then take them." Margaret Hale remained beside her wagon. Walter frowned at her. "You staying?" "I said she could use the wagon." "You believed we would have a crossing." "I still do." Walter left with his workers. Frank Cole withdrew his promised stone team before sunset. By evening, Nora had lost 4 men and half the hauling power she expected. She changed the schedule again. Asa returned the next morning to examine her drawings. Nora had worked until dawn, laying each sheet across a temporary table weighted with stones. He studied the measurements, then walked the granite walls. His stick touched every crack he could reach. "The site is better," he said. "Then release the remaining timber." "The site is better. Your bridge does not exist. You're looking at the design." "I'm looking at a design drawn in one night for a location you had not planned to use. The measurements are correct. I believe they are." Nora held his gaze. "But the county does not risk 6 men and public timber, because you believe the river has left you no other choice. The river removed the other choice." "Then demonstrate this one." "How?" "Complete the western anchorage. Put it under strain. If the granite and your frame hold, I will reconsider the county labor." That costs 3 days. A failed anchorage costs more. Nora could not argue with the principle. She disliked the time it demanded, not the reason behind it. "You inspect its sunrise on the 3rd day," she said. "If it is ready, it will be." Asa closed her drawings carefully before handing them back. The crew began cutting the western anchorage before noon. Granite dust settled into Nora's sleeves and coated Caleb's hat. The cabin beams lay above the river, cleaned and measured, waiting for the supports that would carry them. Caleb joined Nora at the drawing table after dark. She unfolded her carpenter's rule across the revised plan. His fingers stopped beside the initials cut along its edge. "Who is Harlan Pike?" "A contractor in Wyoming." "And Samuel Reed?" "Idaho, there were 7 sets of initials. Some had been darkened with ink. Others had nearly worn away beneath years of handling." "Builders?" he asked. "Men whose names were burned into bridges I measured." Caleb looked at the rule again. "Where is yours? It isn't there." "You designed all 7? "Parts of 5. Nearly all of 2. Why mark their names on your own rule?" "So I remember what a promise is worth when someone says my name will be added later." Caleb's thumb rested near an empty section of wood. "This bridge carries your name. If it stands, it will." Nora folded the rule. Confidence is not a strain test. No, it's what I have after watching you tear down 6 days of work instead of hiding one bad footing. Outside the tent, hammers continued against stone. Caleb did not leave. "What happens after this bridge?" he asked. "I find another contract." "Where?" "Wherever a door opens." He looked toward the dark shape of his ranch beyond the slope. "Stay here." Nora's fingers stopped over the drawings. "To build what?" "Whatever you choose. That is not employment." "No." The single word sat between them. Caleb moved closer to the table, but he did not reach for her. "I have spent 6 years returning to an empty house because I thought empty was what I had earned," he said. "Then you walked onto this land and started giving orders before you knew where supper was served." Nora kept both palms against the table. "You hired a bridgewright." "I know who I hired." "Then do not turn the contract into something else, because I used your timber well." His face drew still. "You believe that is what this is?" "I believe Copperbend will say every bridge I build here stands because Caleb Rourke took in a woman no one else wanted." "Let them talk." "They do more than talk. They decide who receives contracts. They decide whose name counts." "I'm not asking to own your work. You're asking me to build my life on your land before my first bridge carries my name." Caleb looked at the scarred rule in her hand. When he spoke, his voice had lost its warmth. "Then, finish the bridge, Miss Bell." He walked out of the tent and crossed to the eastern anchorage. For the rest of the night, Caleb followed every order Nora gave. He did not work beside her again. The western anchorage moved on the second pull. Only half an inch separated the lower timber from Nora's chalk mark, but the gap was enough. She raised one hand, and Levi signaled the men to release the strain. The ropes slackened. Sam crouched beside the granite and pressed his fingers into the opening. "We can pack stone behind it." "No," Nora said. It barely shifted. It moved before the full load reached it. Asa stood above them with his walking stick planted in the thawing bank. He had arrived at sunrise to witness the test, bringing no county workers and no timber. Nora unfolded her rule and measured the gap twice. The frame itself had held. The long cabin beam had not twisted or split. The failure lay beneath the lowest support, where meltwater had softened a narrow layer of earth Nora had believed was solid stone. "We take it apart," she said. Sam stood. "All of it?" "Down to the lowest brace." "That is 2 days of work. It is 2 days of work resting on mud." He looked toward Caleb. Caleb had been standing near the hauling rope since before sunrise. He wiped stone dust from his gloves and walked toward the frame. "Which piece comes out first?" he asked Nora. She showed him. Sam lowered his head and reached for his tools. Asa tapped the failed support with the brass end of his stick. "You said the anchorage would hold. I said it was ready to test." "And? Now?" "Now the test has given us an answer." Nora climbed into the shallow cut beside the granite. The visible rock ended below the failed timber, but the iron testing rod struck something solid farther down. "Bedrock is beneath this layer. We reset there." "How long?" Asa asked. "Until tomorrow morning. You cannot remove that frame, deepen the cut, and rebuild it before sunrise. I can if no one delays me by explaining that I cannot." Asa looked from Nora to the rising river. "If the anchorage is rebuilt and passes inspection at sunrise, I will bring the county crew and the remaining timber." "You said you would reconsider." "I have reconsidered." "What changed?" "You stopped your own tests before anyone else saw the movement." His stick touched the chalk mark. "Most builders would have packed that gap, covered it, and hoped the river waited until after inspection. I'm not most builders. I am beginning to understand that." He mounted his horse. "Sunrise, Miss Bell. If the frame is not ready, my men remain in Copperbend." Nora turned before he rode away. "Bring every man you promised. We will not have 4 days left." Asa glanced at the red-tipped stakes. "No," he said. "You won't." The crew dismantled the western anchorage. Each removed timber exposed wet soil that had been frozen when Nora first measured it. Water slipped through the gravel in thin silver lines, weakening the ground from behind. They cut deeper. Margaret Hale sent 2 workers when word reached her that the test had failed. Walter Briggs did not return. Frank Cole sent a message asking whether he should begin clearing the 40-mile detour. Nora told the rider that Cole should prepare for either outcome. She would not purchase confidence with a promise the bridge had not earned. By afternoon, the solid granite lay exposed. Caleb worked below with Levi, clearing loose stone while Nora checked the new measurements from above. He followed every instruction without hesitation. He still called her Miss Bell. When Nora lowered a bucket of tools, their hands met briefly on the handle. Caleb released it first. The distance between them had begun affecting the work. Questions that had once required a glance now required full sentences. Small decisions traveled from one end of the anchorage to the other through Levi. Nora waited until the men stopped for water. "Caleb," he turned. "Walk with me." They moved upstream, away from the crew, but remained within sight. The foundation of the dismantled cabin stood on the slope above them. Nora opened her folding rule, then closed it again. "What you asked last night deserved a better answer. I asked too soon. That was not the problem." He waited. "I have worked for men who praised me until payment came due," she said. "Men who promised my name would appear on the next bridge. Men who called my work valuable while making certain I could not prove it belonged to me. I'm not those men. I know." The answer changed the set of his shoulders. Nora continued before she could soften it. "But knowing that does not remove 20 years of practice. I leave before respect becomes obligation. It has kept my tools in my hands, and kept every place temporary." "Yes," Caleb looked toward the bridge site. "I should not have asked you to choose a future while you were fighting to put your name on the first piece of it. You asked plainly. I answered as if you had hidden terms. I didn't. I know that, too." He removed one glove and held out his hand. Nora looked at it. "This isn't another contract," he said. "No." She placed her hand in his. His grip remained firm for one brief second before he released her. "We finished the bridge," he said. "Then we speak again." Agreed, they returned to work side by side. Near sunset, Nora examined the tabletop river channel. She rebuilt the model around the narrower granite site and increased the flow. The main span held in place. The lower wooden frame beneath it did not. Water caught the model supports and dragged them downstream. One small block representing the finished span shifted with them. Nora poured the water again. The same thing happened. She called the crew to the table. "This lower frame is temporary," she said. "It carries the span while we assemble it. Once the bridge is locked into the granite, the frame becomes a danger." Owen leaned over the channel, "Because the ice catches it, and pulls against everything connected to it." She removed the lower pieces from the model and released another flow of water. This time, the current passed beneath the span. "We build the remaining frame so it can be released from the banks. No one goes beneath it once the river reaches the final mark." Levi studied the model. "You expect to remove support while the ice is coming? I expect to remove what the ice can use against us." Nora marked the release positions on her drawing and assigned one to each worker. They repeated the sequence without tools until everyone could move to the correct place without crossing another man's path. Then they returned to the anchorage. Night settled over Shale Cut. Hammer blows carried from one granite wall to the other. The cabin beam was lowered into its new position shortly before midnight, and Nora measured every joint with the scarred rule. Caleb brought the final brace as Nora finished. A sharp crack sounded from the river. They turned together. The first red-tipped stake spun in the black water below the bridge site. The current carried it beneath the unfinished frame and out of sight. Nora looked at the remaining mark, then at the dark line climbing the granite. The river had taken another day from them. Less than 48 hours remained. At sunrise, the rebuilt anchorage did not move. The hauling ropes drew tight. Cabin timbers settled against granite. The frame took the full strain, and Nora's chalk line remained unbroken. Asa Voss crouched beside it with his brass-tipped stick. He checked the lower support, the braces, and the stone beneath them. Then he stood and waved toward the road. 6 county workers brought 2 wagons down the slope. 8 lengths of pine lay across the first. Iron hardware, rope, and a portable forge filled the second. "You met the condition," Asa said. "I expect all 6 men until the bridge is finished. You have them." He handed her the county work list. Nora did not thank him. Asa had promised resources in exchange for a sound anchorage, and she had provided one. She divided the new workers between Levi and Sam. Owen rode upstream to watch the ice jam that had formed beyond the bend. Margaret Hale's wagon team began moving stone toward the eastern approach. The construction camp changed shape within minutes. Fresh saw cuts flashed against dark cabin timber. Hammers rang from both sides of the river. The county blacksmith, Miriam Pike, set her small forge on level ground above the western bank. Nora stood at the center of it, folding and unfolding her rule as each measurement arrived. The 2 longest cabin beams formed the heart of the span. Caleb and Levi guided the first into position, while Nora watched its alignment from the western granite. "Lower the north end," she called. The beam moved. 2 inches. It settled against the prepared support. "Hold." No one looked toward Caleb for confirmation. Nora crossed to the opposite line and checked the angle. The beam sat cleanly, its grain running straight between the anchors. "Secure it." The second beam followed before noon. Caleb removed his gloves before placing his hands against the old pine. Faint cuts from the cabin walls remained along one side. They would face inward beneath the bridge deck, protected from weather. Nora noticed him touch one mark with his thumb. "Ready?" she asked. He put his gloves back on. "Ready." The crews raised it. By afternoon, the main span reached across shale cut for the first time. It was not yet a bridge. The upper braces remained open. The approaches ended several feet short, and the lower construction frame still stood in the path of the rising river. But a continuous line of timber now joined the 2 granite walls. Asa examined it from the western bank. "You could place the deck and test it before dark," he said. "Not before the upper braces are locked. The span is carrying itself. It has not carried a moving load. You may not have tomorrow." Then, we used today correctly. Asa's walking stick struck the ground once. "Finish the braces." The order went through both crews. Miriam worked the forge, while her assistant carried fitted iron pieces to the bridge. Heat shimmered above the coals. Each finished pin released a thin line of steam when lifted into the cold air. Caleb approached the forge, while Nora checked the eastern approach. She saw him speak to Miriam and point toward the bridge. Miriam listened, then looked directly at Nora. "What is he asking you to make?" Nora called. Miriam wiped soot across her apron. "A plate." "What kind?" Caleb answered. "A builder's plate." Nora came down from the approach. The sounds of construction continued around them, but Miriam waited with her hammer lowered. Caleb took Nora's folding rule gently and opened it across his palm. The 7 sets of contractors' initials showed along the edge. "This bridge will not carry one of their names," he said. "It does not carry any name until it stands. Then the plate waits." Miriam picked up a flat piece of iron. "What do you want stamped?" Caleb looked at Nora. She examined the unfinished span. Men were fitting the last upper brace while black water climbed the granite below. "Nora Bell," she said. "Bridgewright," Miriam nodded. Caleb returned the folding rule. No promise had been made about later. No man had offered to add her name after his own was already fixed above it. The iron would wait beside the forge until the bridge earned it. Nora went back to work. The upper braces were locked by sunset. She ordered everyone off the structure and began the final safety examination alone. She moved from one end to the other, checking the joints with her rule and marking each completed point in chalk. Caleb remained on the bank with the crew. He did not ask her to hurry. The river struck the temporary frame below with increasing force. When Nora reached the eastern end, she found a small opening where one brace met the main beam. Sam saw her measuring it. "That will close under weight. It should be closed before weight. We lose another hour if we reset it. We lose the bridge if we begin deciding which gaps deserve standards." Sam reached for his tools. No one argued. They reset the brace under lamplight. By midnight, the main span passed Nora's first stationary test. She still required a controlled moving load before allowing wagons onto it. Asa checked the sky. "The ice jam may break before morning." "I know. You could approve the span now." "No." He looked at her for several seconds. "Then, test it." They prepared the load from materials already at the camp and moved it across while every worker remained in an assigned safe position. The bridge gave a low wooden sound as the weight reached its center. Nora watched the chalk marks. Nothing shifted. The load crossed to the eastern bank. Levi took off his hat and rubbed the top of his head. Sam sat on a stone. One county worker began laughing until the sound traveled through the exhausted crew. Nora did not approve the bridge. The lower frame still had to be released, and the approaches remained incomplete. She gathered everyone around the tabletop river channel. They rehearsed the release sequence again. Each worker repeated his position and route. No one would enter the water or stand beneath the bridge. If Nora gave the order, they would release the temporary frame from the banks and retreat to marked ground. "What if one side catches?" Owen asked. "No one goes after it," she said. "The bridge matters less than the people building it." Caleb watched her as the men returned to their assignments. "You said we would speak after the bridge," he said. "It is not finished. We may not find a quiet hour when it is." She almost told him quiet hours could be made. Then she saw the dark water rising around the lower frame. "Speak. There is a stone shed west of my house. It has its own door and enough ground for a timber yard." Nora waited. "I'll lease it to you," he continued. "Written terms. Your shop. Your contracts. Your name. I will have no share unless you ask for one. And us?" His eyes held hers. "Also your choice." Nora folded her rule and placed it in her belt. "If the bridge stands, we discuss the lease. And us?" A small warmth reached her face despite the river wind. "We discuss that without paper." Caleb's mouth shifted into the rare smile she had first seen across the drawing table. A rifle shot sounded upstream. Every worker stopped. Owen appeared on the ridge, riding hard and waving his hat. The jam broke. He shouted, "Whole river's moving." Nora looked at the unfinished approaches and the temporary frame still bound beneath the span. The surge would reach Shale Cut in 20 minutes. Nora moved before Owen's horse reached the camp. "Everyone to the positions we practiced. Tools stay behind unless they belong at your station." The workers scattered across both banks. Levi and 2 county men took the western release line. Sam led the eastern group. Owen abandoned his horse above the marked safe ground and ran to the approach. Asa reached for the unfinished decking. We could secure 3 more boards before it arrives. No, Nora said. Clear the span. The first pieces of broken ice appeared around the bend. They moved faster than the surface water, turning as the current carried them toward shale cut. Caleb came beside Nora. What do you need? Check both banks. Make certain no one remains below the retreat marks. He ran west without questioning her. The temporary frame stood beneath the bridge like a second wooden skeleton. It had carried the cabin beams while the main span was assembled. Now the current struck its legs hard enough to shake the deck above. Nora climbed the western approach and placed one hand against the main beam. The bridge remained seated against the granite. Release the lower ties, she called. Levi's group moved first. The western side of the temporary frame dropped several inches. Sam's men released the east. The main span gave a deep wooden groan. 2 county workers stepped back from their line. It's falling, one shouted. It's settling onto its anchors, Nora said. Hold your position. Another wave of broken ice rounded the bend. The workers stared at the narrow gap opening between the bridge and its lower supports. Years of building practice told them never to remove support from beneath a span. Nora had less than a minute to overcome that instinct. Final release, she called. No one moved. Caleb reached the western retreat mark. His voice crossed the gorge. You heard the foreman. Release it. Levi pulled first. Sam followed. The lower frame separated from the main span with a cracking burst of wet timber. The river caught it, turned it sideways, and drove it toward the eastern granite. The frame struck once, broke into 3 sections, and vanished downstream. The bridge remained above the water. Retreat, Nora ordered. Every worker moved to the marked high ground. Caleb reached Nora as the first heavy surge entered the cut. Water rose over the lowest stones and filled the space where the construction frame had stood. Then the ice arrived. It struck the granite walls and shattered into white fragments. Water climbed the rock, pushing broken slabs beneath the new span. The bridge lifted slightly under the force traveling through its beams. Nora watched the western chalk line. It held. A larger piece of ice hit the center. The bridge flexed, released the pressure, and settled again. Caleb stood close enough for their shoulders to touch. Is it supposed to move like that? Yes. How much? Less than it just did. Another impact traveled beneath their boots. The cabin beams held. The corrected western anchorage did not shift. Water passed cleanly through the open space where the temporary frame would have trapped it. The tabletop river channel had given them the answer days earlier. They had trusted it in time. The surge continued for nearly an hour. No one returned to the bridge until Nora saw the waterline begin to fall against the granite. Asa approached the western anchorage and examined the chalk mark. Still exact, he said. Nora touched the main beam. The wood carried a low vibration from the river, but every joint remained seated. Levi removed his hat. Does that mean we have a bridge? It means we still have a span, Nora said. We finish the approaches before anyone crosses. The crew laughed, not because she had made a joke, but because her answers sounded exactly like Nora. Work resumed when the water dropped below the retreat marks. They replaced 2 approach boards damaged during the release and completed the eastern slope with stone from Margaret Hale's wagon. Miriam fitted the final iron pieces, while Asa examined every joint Nora had marked. Caleb worked beside Nora again. He did not call her Miss Bell. The bridge was ready for its final inspection shortly after sunrise the next morning. Asa crossed first on foot, striking each section with his walking stick. He returned with a controlled load used during the earlier test and watched the chalk lines as it passed from one bank to the other. Nothing moved beyond Nora's allowed marks. Asa closed his inspection book. The Copperbend County office has 2 smaller crossings scheduled for summer. Nora waited. I want you to submit a price. An application? A bid? Under your own name. She glanced at the brass tip of his walking stick. You told me quick ears did not make a bridgewright. They don't. His eyes traveled along the completed span. This does. Nora held out her hand. Asa shook it once, then stepped aside. Caleb stood at the western entrance. He had not crossed the river in 6 years. Nora joined him. He removed his gloves and tucked them into his belt. You don't have to do this before the wagon, she said. I know. He placed one boot on the first board. The bridge answered with a firm wooden sound. They walked together. At the center, Caleb stopped and looked down at the water, moving beneath them. His hands remained at his sides. He did not turn back toward the empty place where the old crossing had stood. My brother would have complained about the climb on the eastern approach, he said. Was he usually right? Only often enough to be difficult. Nora offered her hand. Caleb took it, and they finished crossing. On the eastern bank, he looked toward the distant ranch. The stone shed? Write the lease. And the conversation without paper? Nora stepped close and placed her palm against his coat. I'm staying because I have work here. I understand. I'm also staying because you saw what I could build before anyone else would look. Caleb bent toward her slowly enough to leave the choice with her. Nora closed the remaining distance. Their kiss was brief, warm, and private, despite the workers waiting across the bridge. A wagon bell rang from the western bank. Margaret Hale sat at the front of her loaded freight wagon. Asa checked the approach one final time, then raised his hand. Margaret guided the team forward. The wheels crossed the boards in a steady rhythm. The cabin beams carried the load over the river and onto the eastern road. Only after the wagon reached solid ground did Miriam bring Nora the finished iron plate. Caleb held it against the upstream post, while Nora aligned it beneath the morning sun. The stamped words were simple. Nora Bell, bridgewright. She drove the final fastener into place. Caleb's hand remained beside hers on the bridge they had finished together. If Nora and Caleb's hard-earned crossing stayed with you, subscribe and leave a like for more frontier stories built on choices that matter.